Okay, and we're live. So, welcome to another episode of Cyber Bites, the podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Ian Webster. For those that don't know Ian is the co-founder and CEO at Promptfoo. Ian, it's great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
You're welcome. Where are you based at the moment in the world?
So I'm based in the Bay Area. I'm in California.
You're in the heart of it, then. Yeah, nice.
I have, yeah, of it.
Like many early stage startups, right? Especially in the cyber and tech space. So yeah, the way I like to start the podcast is to rewind the clock. To start with, can you give the audience a quick introduction to who you are and then also the problem that you guys are solving at Promptfoo?
Yeah. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Promptfoo, and originally the open source maintainer and author. So my background is in engineering. Promptfoo started as an open source project. Um, the problem that Promptfoo is trying to solve is that Gen AI is inherently insecure and unreliable when you're building it into an application. So in a nutshell, we are building a red teaming tool for Gen AI applications. How do you make sure that your application behaves properly? How do you make sure it doesn't have data leak, PII, access control issues? Um, how do you make sure it doesn't, say racist things or offensive things? Everything of that nature is what
Mhm.
we are trying to monitor and solve.
Yeah, very cool. And it closely ties to your background, right? Because were you shipping Gen AI products to Discord members? Was that right?
Yeah, so prior to this, I was in a position to lead LLM engineering at Discord on a handful of products that we wound up shipping to hundreds of millions of users. So that was like a crash course in all of the wonderful and also terrible things that Gen AI can manifest when it's out in the world. Um, Discord, I would say, has a very adversarial user base in the sense that there are a lot of 14-year-old boys, and that kind of thing who are just looking for holes in the AI that you're putting out. So that's what first exposed me to this problem.
Yeah, they're super interesting. Is there any stories that you can share there at Discord, like that you came across, any instances? I don't know if there's like NDAs involved here, but when you're shipping these products, if there was potential hacks or I don't know, any stories around that that could be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, um, there were many things that we dealt with. I think the one that was most prominent was um, there's this so-called grandma jailbreak in GPT where you can tell GPT like, hey, my grandma passed away, but she used to tell me these wonderful stories about how to how to cook meth or like how to do something really terrible. Um, that was the grandma jailbreak, and I think now
Right.
it's very widespread, but it started on Discord. So I was
Yeah.
victim number one of the grandma jailbreak because we had to scramble and kind of figure out how are we gonna mitigate this. It sounds
Mhm.
very obvious now, but this was early days. This was, I think, even before GPT-4 came out. So it was just one of the first jailbreaks that really captured a lot of media attention and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's
Um,
interesting. Yeah, I can imagine it's just evolved so much now, with attackers using AI in AI, right? So there's just so many opportunities to create these jailbreaks, as you say. And it leads us nicely to your background and then coming up to prompt through. So what's the story of founding? So you're obviously a strong engineer background, had exposure to AI, but was there a point in your journey you're like, hey, you know what, it's time to set up?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Promptfoo started as an open source project. Originally, I was was not thinking about this as a company. I was just thinking about it as a gap in the world. And what I was building was really just out of uh, frustration that there wasn't something else out there, right? Because at Discord, we were doing all of this evaluation and red teaming kind of ad hoc on our own. So I was building the tool that I wished that I had. Um, and I didn't really start thinking about it commercially until over a year later, where we had started to see massive adoption, tens of thousands of users, um, including at major companies. And I was starting to get people to reach out to me and be like, hey, can we pay you for like a little bit of support or some more things on the enterprise readiness side and that kind of thing. So that's when we incorporated the company and started to
Mhm.
build out the enterprise product as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool feeling, right? You just getting people reach out and you're like, hey, can we have your support with this? So that's probably the point.
Yeah,
It's like, hang on a minute, there's probably a bigger business here, right?
yeah, and I think that's I've always been really passionate about open source. I've done a lot of open source projects and put a lot of my work out there, and I think um, that's one of the benefits of it is that you can test these ideas, you can build a community around it,
Mm.
and you can provide value without having to, just be completely focused on extracting value back. So it's just like this virtuous cycle.
Yeah. And in your journey, because from your background, you've held many like team leadership positions, right? And I think it looks like we haven't really discussed this, but you've done a couple of like spin ups, your own startups, maybe. Have there been any like significant mentors or influencers in your journey that have helped you guide to where you are today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I've met many great people in my career who provided advice, and many of them are investors in Promptfoo today. Um, I think also going through YC, um, with my previous company at this point, almost I guess 8 or 9 years ago, that was also very transformative and kind of was like an early step into the Silicon Valley
Mm,
ecosystem and the startup ecosystem, which is just an exciting place to be.
mm. What did you learn from that first time? You say like 8 years ago, you got through the Y Combinator. What did you bring forward from that experience to this?
I think, anytime you do a company, you probably walk away with ideas for things that you would do differently, or you have scar tissue from mistakes that you made. Um, so there are definitely lessons learned the second time around, and I think honestly, now that I reflect on it, it's mostly along the lines of like listening more to YC's advice and because it's not rocket science. They just tell you the things that you like really ought to be doing. Um, uh, just around things like early hiring, focus, uh, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And look, these guys have been doing it for many years, right? So their advice is normally pretty good advice, and they've done it for a number of different startups. So makes complete sense. Um, cool. And prompt food. So you explain what you guys are doing and what you're building at the moment. Is there any particular like use cases that you can share? You don't have to drop names of how you guys are supporting the ecosystem.
Yeah, we um, honestly we cover use cases across the board. So the most common use case that we see is agentic RAGs. Um, either with a chat interface or some other user input interface. But the architectures are becoming more complex. So, everyone originally wanted to add a knowledge base to their chatbot. Now they're adding API calls, like database connections, other functions. Um, and that's when stuff gets really hairy. Um, I think there are two sides of the coin to Gen AI security. There's kind of on the model side, you have all the jailbreaks and injections and some of the nasty behaviors, but the applications security side is extremely interesting. I think that's the area where you're going to see more problems where there are just really ways to shoot yourself in the foot. Um, so in terms of use cases, that's what we've been focusing on is helping AppSec teams uh, secure these Gen AI applications from um, kind of all the ways that you can screw up the interface between the model and the application itself. In terms of who's using it, uh, we work with multiple Fortune 500s. We have folks uh, across almost all of the foundation AI labs and major companies, especially on the open source um, teams at like OpenAI, Anthropic, Amazon, Microsoft. All these folks are using Promptfoo in some way.
Yeah, that's super cool. Um, and in terms of Promptfoo as a business, where are you guys at today? So you're A16Z backed, right?
Yeah, so we raised a seed round from Andreessen Horowitz, and that was fairly recent. That was just in July.
Mm,
Um, and it's been going well. I mean, we raised a healthy seed. We've been able to build a modest team to focus on um, maintaining and expanding the open source, but also creating a commercial offering that makes sense and kind of takes it to the next level for the folks who had already been using the open source.
yeah, that's interesting. How are you seeing that customer shift? Is it I don't want to use the word easy, but the customers that are essentially inbound, right? They're using the open source technology. Um, how are you seeing that shift into commercial and paying customers?
Yeah, it's a process because not everyone is ready to sign up for the enterprise version, and that's fine. Like I'm approaching the open source not like opportunistically or as a marketing tool, but like our open source offering is really solid. Um, so um, yeah, so I'm like I'm going into this with the understanding that some folks will do just fine with the open source,
Hmm.
but um, I think I would say we've had good success so far, especially with larger enterprises who need a little more than what's out there in the open source. And um, specifically, what has been working nicely is we've been helping with the full vulnerability management lifecycle. So not just finding vulnerabilities, but how do you track these and continuously monitor them over time, and also how do you remediate them? So
Sure.
we have a lot of we have a great CI/CD integration and a lot of like analytics or insights on the remediation side. So that's some that has been working nicely.
Yeah, that's very cool. And in terms of the like trends, you're obviously working with a lot of large Fortune 500 customers. A lot of the like case studies and newsletters I'm reading, it sounds like adoption of AI, and it's pretty obvious, right? It's just gradually increasing, and 2025, it sounds like there's going to be a big adoption and continue to be a big adoption. Is there any trends that you're seeing from folks you're working with or what you're hearing day to day in the space?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously I'm very bullish on Gen AI and we see adoption increasing over time. I think what I'm seeing very specifically on the ground is um obviously there's a lot of focus and excitement on Gen AI. There's a lot of hype around Gen AI. Um there are fewer companies are actually shipping Gen AI to their users. Um and I think the biggest reason for that by far is the safety and security problem. When you speak with large companies with a lot on the line, it just doesn't make sense to take these sorts of risks with their customers, their reputation, their data, and that kind of thing. So I mean that's why I've just been really excited about this direction because I think that if we want to realize the full potential of Gen AI and realize all the hype, we really need to solve this problem and be able
Mhm.
to measure AI risk and drive it down. Um, so I obviously I talk with a lot of people who are concerned about that. Um, I talk with a lot of folks who have kind of top-down, board level Gen AI initiatives are kind of scrambling to see how do they make that how do they actually operationalize that? How do they get a product out there um, in the desired timeline? And I
Mm.
actually think that's much easier said than done.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. The couple of points you mentioned, and it's just such a big problem. It's just so new, isn't it? Technology. Like it's really all come into the scene properly over the last few years. So it's just a massive problem. And it's interesting you're hearing that. There's just it's not worth the risk, as you say, and until there's some proper security measures in place to risk the data leaks and whatever else that could be caused from customer data and stuff. It probably just doesn't make sense right now. I guess it's like how long's a piece of string, but do you see like a time scale on that of where there might be in a position for these enterprise companies to adopt it properly to customers?
Yeah, I think across the board, there are many enterprises that are considering this a 2025 priority. So I would say the vast majority of enterprises have not figured this out in 2024. It's mostly initiatives spinning up, things scheduled for 2025, that kind of thing. So next year is is the year where I think we can only wait so long for um, to kind of solve these issues around how to operationalize Gen AI. Um, I think we'll make a lot of headway next year and hopefully see a lot of companies actually shipping user-facing AI. Um, what we see is the internal use cases are coming out first, and companies are kind of taking a wait and see approach to the external use cases. So I think it's
Yeah.
pretty dependent on progress from both the foundation labs and then also just at the AppSec layer. We kind of need more assurances and more tools there.
Yeah, yeah. And are you like as AI is continues to advance, right? Do you foresee any new categories of security threats emerging?
Yeah, I think so. So a lot of what's new can be kind of tied back to the old. Like I was mentioning tool misuse and data access, privacy. Like a lot of those problems actually look like traditional security problems, especially like in many cases with tool use, like the OWASP API top 10 is a lot more applicable than the LM top 10.
Mhm.
Just specifically looking at that type of problem. Um, so I think I think we'll continue to see the space evolve, but um, I do think that there are strong ties to traditional. I'm saying traditional. By that, I just mean non-Gen AI.
Mhm.
Um, the kind of like these standard security practices.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. There's just going to be so much adoption that's going to happen over the next months, years. Future looking for you guys then. So we're closing out obviously 24. As a business, what sort of priorities do you have heading into 25?
Yeah. So there's a lot that I want to do in 2025, but I think the main thing is just focused on getting people over the hump and shipping AI. Um, I I've been there and I know the pain of having to secure Gen AI at scale. Um, so I mean, first order of business is just making sure that we're creating a tool that security tool that works well, is easy to use, can actually help people scan and find vulnerabilities and do this automatically and cheaply. Um, I think beyond that, uh, there's a lot that we want to do in terms of remediation and
Mhm.
saying, okay, now that you have all these problems, how do we make it really easy to close these vulnerabilities and make sure that we're actually solving the problems, not just discovering them. So we have a lot of plans in that direction. I think it
Mhm.
is really important because there are so few best practices around Gen AI security right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting because there's a lot of companies that can find a solution, but then the remediation piece is also key, right? You don't want to just be finding a solution, that's great, but how do you actually go ahead and prioritize and fix that? So it's going to be exciting to see some of the advancements that you guys have then next year.
Yeah, and remediation is a tough problem. It can look really different depending on the type of vulnerability. So there are things that you can mitigate at the prompt layer. There are things that you would want to test out at the guardrails layer. Um, there are foundational vulnerabilities like
Mm.
there are API layer vulnerabilities or application layer. So it really varies, and it's not definitely not a one size fits all thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because like you're in a somewhat unique position because you've been on the engineering side, right, of the house, and you've seen this problem firsthand. Hence why it's part of the story, right, of creating and founding Promptfoo, which is awesome. And the open source piece. Um, like on the engineering side, like, you've had that mindset, right, for a number of years of like build, ship code as fast as possible. And then you've kind of like come onto the security side of things. Is there any learnings that you've seen there coming from that mindset of ship and build versus working very closely with security? Any learnings that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my approach to this today still has a bit of an engineering flavor. Like we're trying to ship something that is very pragmatic. It's a command line tool. It also has a UI, but at its heart, it's just a command line tool that you can use to scan your application for Gen AI vulnerabilities. So um, the engineer in me just wants like it should be point and click or just type a command and go.
Hmm.
And I think that has paid dividends. I hope on the security side because um, uh, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors around AI or a lot of chatter around AI. I feel like it's important to have something out there that is just, it's open source. You download it, you run it, it does the thing. Um, I definitely a ton of learnings from the security side, mainly around how do we make this easy for security teams to deploy and play nice with the engineering side. Um, and then of course just f figuring out how do we incorporate security frameworks and controls and just some of the more structured thinking and structured requirements on the security side. So example of that is just, adding support for frameworks like OWASP, NIST,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth, um, among other things. So it's been kind of a balancing act.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Ian, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your story. Super interesting and unique. And I appreciate you telling us more about Promptfoo and what you guys are up to. Sounds very exciting heading into next year, obviously with the adoption of AI increasing. It's going to be exciting to follow your journey, definitely from the sidelines. Just before we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
Um, no, I think I appreciate all of the questions and thanks for having me on the podcast. Really enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Well, yeah, great to chat, Ian. Speak soon.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed today's show, please like and share with your friends and colleagues as this is really important for the show's reach. If you'd like to be our next guest or are interested in Aspiron Search's staffing solutions, please get in touch directly with me or reach out to us via our website www.aspironsearch.com.